You think the worst part of getting fired is losing your income? It is not. It is watching a boss in $1,000 loafers call your life's work inelegant. When they kicked me into the freezing Chicago winter, they had no idea they just pulled the life support on their own company. I did not beg. I went home, brewed black coffee, and drafted an invoice for $2.5 million. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Boss Revenge Stories. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us without the budget to keep operating, which means we will not be uploading new videos here for the foreseeable future as we transition our work over to Patreon. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us by joining our Patreon community, where you will find even better, longer, and more detailed exclusive true stories featuring multiple emotional voice actors bringing the drama to life. You can join us right now by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the description or the pinned comment below. Now, let us dive into today's story. My name is Emery Stewart, and I am 34 years old. Corporate America is not a meritocracy. It is a carefully stage-managed theater production where the people who do the actual heavy lifting are shoved into the dark orchestra pit, while the actors who merely memorize the script take all the bows under the bright spotlight. I grew up in the harsh, working-class neighborhoods of South Chicago. I did not have a trust fund to fall back on, and I certainly did not possess a fancy piece of paper from an Ivy League university. What I had was a self-taught, relentless obsession with logic, structure, and survival. I spent my teenage years rebuilding discarded computers from scrap parts. Now, I am a data architect, or to be more precise, I was the one who built the digital nervous system that single-handedly saved Aetherus Health from completely collapsing during its chaotic early startup days. My code was never pretty. I wrote the core systems in pure C++ and raw Python. It was gritty, unpolished, and completely devoid of the colorful, user-friendly interfaces that executives absolutely love to stare at during board meetings. But my God, it was fast. It possessed a hardware processing speed that was borderline terrifying, tearing through massive data sets without breaking a sweat. In the medical technology industry, you are not just handling abstract numbers, you are handling people's lives and their most deeply held secrets. My architecture ensured that millions of highly sensitive medical records were completely anonymized, scrubbed, and encrypted with military-grade precision long before they ever touched the public cloud. I was the silent guardian keeping Aetherus Health fully compliant with the incredibly strict federal health privacy laws. I built an impenetrable fortress, and for a few peaceful years, the founders let me guard it in the shadows. Then came Julian Vance. Julian was brought in as our brand new Chief Technology Officer after a massive round of corporate funding. He was a former Wall Street stockbroker who somehow managed to completely rebrand himself as a visionary tech guru. Despite the fact that he probably did not even know how to write a simple print statement, he was the exact kind of guy who wore custom-tailored vests without a tie and $1,000 loafers to the office, always reeking of expensive cologne and misplaced, arrogant confidence. Julian did not care about system stability, and he definitely did not care about patient security. He only cared about venture capital. He was absolutely fanatical about empty, meaningless buzzwords. Every single time he opened his mouth, he spewed exhausted phrases like AI-driven synergy, blockchain health ecosystems, and scalable paradigm shifts. He deeply despised anything that did not look flashy on a PowerPoint presentation for potential investors. To Julian, I was nothing more than a stubborn dinosaur standing in the way of his grand vision. He made that perfectly clear during a massive, mandatory, company-wide quarterly meeting, standing on stage in front of a giant projector screen. He pointed a laser pointer at a simplified diagram of my back-end encryption architecture and sighed dramatically into his wireless microphone. This legacy architecture is clunky, it is brutally inelegant, and frankly, it completely lacks the forward-thinking AI vision that Aetherus needs to scale, he announced, making sure his condescending voice echoed through the entire auditorium. We need modern, agile solutions, not archaic roadblocks. He then proceeded to aggressively shower praise on his newly hired squad of fresh-faced junior developers. These kids did not know how to build a single functional system from scratch. All they did was blindly staple together pre-packaged application programming interfaces from third-party vendors and proudly call it innovation. I sat completely frozen in the back row. My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. But I kept my mouth shut. I endured the public humiliation silently. I went straight back to my desk and continued to relentlessly maintain the underground architecture, ensuring that Inelegant did not violate those crucial federal regulations. Day after day, I watched quietly as Julian systematically pushed out the veteran, gray-haired engineers who actually understood the core product, casually replacing them with a small army of eager yes-men who nodded enthusiastically at his every ridiculous suggestion. I knew exactly what he was doing, but I cared about the integrity of the data far too much to just walk away and let the entire company burn to the ground. The final, unrepairable fracture happened during Julian's highly publicized artificial intelligence integration project. His precious new team deployed a massive software update meant to use large language models to instantly analyze patients' symptoms. They rushed it completely. They did not test the security boundaries. By Friday evening, their shiny new application was quietly bypassing all of my primary encryption layers and was mere inches away from leaking raw, identifiable patient data straight to the open internet. It would have been a catastrophic data breach that would have bankrupted the company overnight and sent executives to federal prison. I caught the fatal error in the server logs just before midnight. I did not go home. I stayed chained to my desk for 3 consecutive nights, chugging stale black coffee and frantically writing emergency patch scripts to silently plug the bleeding holes and aggressively reroute the data back through my secure channels. I saved the company from a multi-million-dollar disaster. How did Julian Vance reward my 3 sleepless nights of fixing his absolute, unmitigated disaster? He called me into his pristine glass-walled office early the following Monday morning. He did not offer a single word of thanks. Instead, he coldly slid a formal performance improvement plan across his polished mahogany desk. He looked down his nose at me, his eyes dead and unfeeling, and said, "Your recent rogue actions over the weekend show a severe lack of team collaboration. You are simply incompatible with the high-speed mindset of our current leadership." He was deliberately setting the legal stage to get rid of me. He truly thought I was just an annoying obstacle standing in the way of his glorious, buzzword-filled future. He thought I was just a disposable blue-collar coder he could easily sweep under the rug. The calendar notification popped onto my screen at precisely 3:30 on Friday afternoon. The subject line read, "Quarter 3 Vision Alignment." The scheduled time was 4 o'clock. Anyone who has spent more than a year working in corporate America knows exactly what a 4 o'clock Friday meeting means. It is the coward's golden hour. It is the universally agreed upon time to legally execute an employee, so they are forced to pack their boxes and disappear into the weekend before they can cause a scene or rally their coworkers. I walked into the frosted glass conference room, feeling the heavy, suffocating weight of inevitability. Julian Vance was already sitting at the head of the table. Next to him sat a woman from Human Resources whom I had never spoken to before. Her face was a perfect, sculpted mask of absolute corporate indifference. Julian did not even bother to look up when I pulled out my chair. He kept his eyes completely glued to his silver tablet, swiping through screens with a manicured finger. "Emery, we are going to keep this brief," Julian began, his voice dripping with that fake, practiced sympathy they teach in executive seminars. "Inelegant is aggressively preparing for our initial public offering. The board wants a seamless, modern technological infrastructure. Frankly, your codebase is just too inelegant. It is a rigid, outdated bottleneck that is actively preventing us from integrating the next-generation models we need to impress our underwriters." I leaned forward, trying to force him to look me in the eye. "Julian, you cannot just rip out the foundational security architecture," I warned, keeping my voice dangerously level. "The core encryption module, the vault, is the only thing standing between our patients and a catastrophic breach. You cannot replace the vault with those large language models you are trying to buy from third-party vendors. They are fundamentally insecure. They will absorb and leak the raw medical records. Julian finally looked up. His lips curled into a patronizing smirk. He waved his hand in the air as if swatting away a pesky fly. Always the alarmist. Emery, you are just trying to protect your own little kingdom because you refuse to adapt to the new paradigm. We have a team of very capable engineers who will transition the system over the weekend. We do not need your permission to innovate. The human resources woman smoothly slid a thin white folder across the polished table. Your employment at Ethos Health is terminated. Effective immediately, she recited in a flat, robotic monotone. You will not receive a severance package due to the documented performance issues regarding your refusal to align with leadership directives. You have exactly 15 minutes to clear your personal belongings from your desk. Before I could even stand up, the screen of my company-issued laptop sitting on the table went completely black. They had already severed my server access. The execution was perfectly synchronized. I was officially a ghost in the machine I had built. 2 security guards escorted me back to my desk and watched as I threw my favorite coffee mug and a few notebooks into a cardboard box. I did not say a word to anyone. The walk to the elevator felt incredibly long, the bright fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like a swarm of angry bees. As the steel doors of the elevator slid shut, isolating me from the office floor, I pulled my personal cell phone out of my coat pocket. I had not been kicked out of the general company communication channels on my mobile device yet. I opened the application. In the main engineering channel, Julian had just posted a company-wide announcement. Thrilled to announce we are finally removing the conservative legacy mindsets holding us back to a faster, smarter, artificial intelligence-driven future. Below his message, a cascading waterfall of clapping hands and rocket ship emojis flooded the screen, posted by the very same junior developers who were about to inherit a system they fundamentally did not understand. A second later, my screen flashed, and the application forcefully logged me out. I stepped out of the glass lobby doors and right into the freezing, biting wind of a brutal Chicago winter storm. The snow was falling heavy and fast, coating the concrete in a sheet of blinding white, but I did not feel cold, and I certainly did not feel defeated. I set my cardboard box down on a snow-covered bench, pulled off my glove, and unlocked my phone again. I bypassed my standard applications and logged directly into a hidden, personal cloud server dashboard. The screen loaded, displaying a single, pulsating green status bar. It was still active. I let out a slow, sharp breath, and a smirk crept across my freezing face. Julian had fired the employee standing in his way, but in his absolute arrogance, he completely forgot to check who I was and what I actually owned before I ever signed my name on their employment contract. The heat in my apartment was barely working when I unlocked the front door, but the chill in my bones had nothing to do with the winter storm raging outside. I did not take off my wet coat. I walked straight past the kitchen, ignoring the blinking light on my coffee maker, and sat down at my heavy oak desk. I pulled a battered, thick black laptop out of the bottom drawer. It was not the sleek company machine they had just confiscated. This was my personal rig, the one I had built piece by piece before Ethos was even a registered corporate entity. I booted it up. The cooling fans roared to life, sounding like a jet engine preparing for takeoff. My fingers flew across the worn mechanical keyboard, pulling up an encrypted local drive. I bypassed 3 layers of password protection until I found the exact document I was looking for. It was a digital PDF file, dated exactly 4 years ago. Back then, Ethos could not afford to hire me as a full-time employee. They had brought me on as an independent contractor to build their initial security proof of concept. Here is the beautiful, terrifying twist that Julian Vance and his army of corporate lawyers completely failed to research: the vault. That brutally inelegant core encryption module he hated so much did not belong to Ethos Health. I wrote every single line of that foundational code sitting in this exact chair, 6 months before I ever signed my official full-time employment contract. I registered the intellectual property under my own personal LLC. Ethirus did not own my architecture. They were merely borrowing it under a temporary internal use software license that required annual renewal. And buried deep within the legalese of that original contract was a very standard, very lethal termination clause. If the creator of the software was terminated from the company without a legally justified cause, the complementary internal use license was immediately revoked. But the legal trap was only half of the nightmare waiting for them. The physical reality of the network was even worse. The vault did not run on Ethirus hardware. They thought it did, because it was seamlessly integrated into their backend. But it was actually a completely external application programming interface. It lived on a private cluster of cloud servers that I personally rented, and I paid the hefty maintenance bills out of my own checking account every single month. I held the master encryption keys. Ethirus was just a tenant renting a highly fortified house, and they had just violently evicted the landlord while leaving all their most valuable possessions locked inside. Revenge in the digital age does not require hacking. It does not require malicious viruses or dramatic cyber attacks. It only requires a quiet, methodical application of the rules they agreed to. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the green command line interface glowing in the dimly lit room. I did not shut their system down. Disconnecting them completely would have alerted their monitoring tools instantly. Instead, I opened my administrator dashboard. I navigated to the Billing and Licensing tab for the Ethirus API key. With 3 keystrokes, I changed their account status. I flipped the toggle from indefinite free internal use to our standard commercial tier. The new pricing model was incredibly simple, yet devastating. They would now be charged a premium commercial rate for every single gigabyte of medical data processed through my servers. I hit the enter key to save the changes. The deployment took less than 2 seconds. The trap was armed. The silent timer had officially started ticking. For the next 14 days, my life was blissfully mundane. While Julian Vance was undoubtedly parading around his glass office, celebrating his bold new vision, I was taking long, quiet walks along the frozen lake. I spent my mornings lifting heavy weights at the local neighborhood gym, feeling the stress of corporate servitude slowly drain from my muscles. In the evenings, I sat at crowded dive bars, drinking cheap draft beer and eating greasy burgers with old friends. I did not look at my code. I did not check my email. But every night before I went to sleep, I would open a small, discrete tracking application on my phone. The application displayed a rising line graph, tracking the data flow passing through my servers. My inelegant C++ algorithms were still out there in the digital dark, silently shouldering the entire weight of the Ethirus database, and the billing meter was spinning wildly, completely unchecked. Back at the corporate headquarters, Julian was digging his own grave with terrifying speed, eager to prove his brilliance to the board of directors. He authorized the immediate deployment of his shiny new artificial intelligence integration. He layered the untested large language models directly on top of the existing infrastructure. He was completely oblivious to the fact that his artificial intelligence could not natively read the encrypted patient files. In order to analyze the data, his new system had to decipher it first. Every time the artificial intelligence requested a patient record, it blindly pinged my external API to translate the information. It was like forcing a machine to read an entire library of books, but making it pay a human translator for every single word. The artificial intelligence was relentless, scraping the database 24 hours a day. The server traffic did not just increase, it exploded. By the end of the second week, the volume of data being funneled through my personal servers had multiplied to 50 times the normal operational capacity. Sitting in my living room, watching the snow fall outside my window, I looked down at my phone. The usage metric just crossed the final red threshold. The financial limit was approaching fast. I took a slow sip of my black coffee and smiled. The bomb had just been triggered. The first day of the new month rolled in with a quiet, undeniable finality. At exactly 2:14 in the morning, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was an automated alert from my bank. The personal credit card I used to keep the cloud hosting servers running had just slammed violently into its absolute maximum credit limit. The astronomical surge in data traffic, entirely manufactured by the relentless scraping of Julian's new artificial intelligence tool, had generated a server bill so massive it triggered my bank's fraud protection. When the automated billing system at the cloud provider attempted to process the payment for the next billing cycle, the transaction was instantly denied. The hosting company operates on a strict, merciless policy. No payment means no servers. In the blink of an eye, the virtual machines hosting my encryption architecture powered down. The external application programming interface went completely dark. The sudden silence on my monitoring dashboard was the loudest sound in the world. I sat up in bed, poured a glass of cold water, and watched the connection status turn from healthy green to dead gray. I did not need to be inside the Icarus headquarters to know exactly what the apocalypse looked like. The collapse would have been instantaneous and utterly catastrophic. The moment my servers disconnected, the digital bridge holding their entire infrastructure together instantly vaporized. Suddenly, tens of thousands of highly confidential medical files had nowhere safe to go. Instead of being carefully encrypted and routed through my secure vault, the patient data slammed directly into the unyielding wall of Julian's new system. The artificial intelligence model, desperate for input, began violently inhaling the raw data. It stripped away the protective layers and spat the information back out as unencrypted plain text. Somewhere in downtown Chicago, the massive internal monitoring screens mounted on the engineering floor were undoubtedly flashing a blinding, terrifying crimson red. By 8 o'clock that morning, the real-world consequences began to detonate. The major hospitals, the massive clients who paid Icarus millions of dollars a year for reliable service, were the first to feel the blast wave. The secure patient portals completely froze. When frantic doctors and nurses tried to force the application to refresh, the user interface vomited chaotic streams of corrupted characters and broken fonts across their tablets. But the cosmetic errors were the least of their problems. The core routing logic, no longer protected by my rigid sorting algorithms, completely shattered. The data streams crossed. The highly sensitive lab results of a 70-year-old cardiac patient were suddenly displaying on the mobile app of a 22-year-old pregnant woman. Patient confidentiality vanished into thin air. The customer support phone lines at Icarus must have been melting off the desks. Hospital administrators were undoubtedly calling and screaming at the top of their lungs, threatening immediate lawsuits. I could easily picture Julian Vance pacing frantically inside his pristine glass conference room, sweating profusely right through his custom-tailored designer vest. In a state of pure panic, he would have summoned his hand-picked squad of young, trendy developers, the very same kids he praised for their agile mindset just a few weeks ago. He probably slammed his hands on the table and demanded they fix the outage immediately. But those poor kids were completely blind in the dark. They were ordered to dig into the foundational basement of the system and restart my code. They opened the files and stared at the raw, unforgiving C++ algorithms I had written. To them, my code might as well have been written in ancient Sumerian. They only knew how to drag and drop pre-packaged tools and call external libraries. When faced with the brutal, complex reality of bottom-tier memory management and manual thread allocation, they were totally paralyzed. They simply did not possess the fundamental engineering survival skills required to navigate the deep architecture I built. The panic could not be contained within the office walls. By noon, the chaos spilled over into the internet. I opened my laptop and scrolled through anonymous engineering forums on Reddit and professional networks like LinkedIn. The whispers were spreading like a wildfire. Nameless employees from Icarus were posting frantic, heavily redacted pleas for help, describing an apocalyptic data disaster at a major health technology startup. The industry was already beginning to smell the blood in the water. Julian, completely driven by his towering ego and desperate to protect his fragile reputation, went into full cover-up mode. According to a leaked screenshot I saw on a message board, he sent out a company-wide email blatantly lying to his staff and the board of directors. We are currently experiencing a minor service degradation due to a temporary outage from our third-party network provider, he wrote, trying to sound completely in control. He promised the board that his genius team was merely minutes away from restoring full functionality. But Julian did not stop at lying. He made his final, fatal mistake. Desperate to regain control, he ordered his lead software engineer to forcefully break into my old archived log files and physically bypass the encryption protocols. He actually thought he could just order a junior developer to hack my architecture and steal the routing logic to save his own skin. He had no idea that I had spent years anticipating exactly this kind of corporate theft. The moment their clumsy, desperate code attempted to forcefully decompile my custom binaries, they tripped my second, heavily concealed security wire. The system did not just block them, it actively gathered evidence. The moment it detected an unauthorized reverse engineering attempt, the software instantly captured a pristine, time-stamped forensic log of their intrusion. It packaged the precise Internet Protocol addresses, the user credentials of the person attempting the hack, an undeniable proof of their willful copyright infringement. It encrypted the entire digital dossier into a tiny, unbreakable file and quietly fired it off into the ether, delivering it straight to my personal, highly secured email inbox. I watched the new message notification pop up on my screen. I downloaded the compressed file, verified the cryptographic signature, and leaned back in my chair. The trap was no longer just set. It had completely snapped shut, and Julian Vance had his own neck perfectly positioned right inside the jaws. I met Marcus at a dimly lit, completely empty dive bar on the edge of the financial district. Marcus was a seasoned, ruthless intellectual property attorney who had spent the last 3 decades absolutely destroying careless tech startups in federal court. He was an apex predator in a tailored wool suit, nursing a neat glass of incredibly expensive scotch. Spread out on the sticky, scratched wooden table between us was a massive, incredibly thick physical binder. It contained every single printed log, every time-stamped forensic packet, and every single undeniable proof of concept showing that Ethirus Health was currently committing gross, catastrophic violations of both my personal copyright and federal health privacy laws. Marcus slowly flipped through the densely packed pages, a dark, predatory smile creeping across his weathered face. The legal reality of the situation was beautifully, terribly simple. The federal government does not take kindly to healthcare companies playing reckless games with civilian medical records. If the federal agencies discovered that Ethirus was actively leaking raw, completely unencrypted patient data because of a botched, unauthorized software integration, the company would be instantly slammed with tens of millions of dollars in catastrophic regulatory fines. But it went deeper than just corporate bankruptcy, because Julian Vance had actively attempted a cover-up and authorized the illegal hacking of my secure architecture to hide his incompetence. He was looking at severe, personal criminal liability. He could very easily go to federal prison. The vault, my brilliantly inelegant code, was the single, solitary barrier standing between Ethirus and total legal annihilation. And in their absolute arrogance, they had not only stolen that barrier, they had completely shattered it. Right as Marcus was explaining the precise mechanisms of a federal audit, my personal cell phone vibrated violently against the wooden table. I glanced down at the glowing screen. It was an incoming text message from an unsaved number, but I recognized the corporate prefix immediately. Julian Vance had finally swallowed his towering pride and desperately dug up my contact information from the human resources files. The message was a pathetic, frantic display of corporate panic disguised as authority. Emery, the legacy system is throwing critical errors. You need to log in and deploy a patch immediately. The company is willing to generously compensate you at your standard hourly consulting rate for your time today. I stared at the glowing text message, feeling a profound, icy calm wash over me. The absolute audacity of the man was staggering. He had unceremoniously kicked me out into a blizzard with 15 minutes of notice, stolen my intellectual property, crashed the entire company infrastructure, and now he truly believed he could just whistle and have me come running back to clean up his mess for a few extra dollars an hour. He still thought he was the master of the universe. He still thought I was just a desperate laborer. I did not type out a long, angry response. I did not demand an apology or explain the legal trap he was currently suffocating inside. I simply opened the emoji keyboard, selected a single image of an hourglass, and hit send. The sand was falling. Then, I permanently blocked his phone number. "Was that our favorite chief technology officer?" Marcus asked, raising a single gray eyebrow as he took a slow sip of his scotch. I nodded, slipping the phone back into my pocket. "He wants to pay me an hourly rate to fix the problem." Marcus actually laughed out loud, a harsh, grating sound in the empty bar. "Well, he is right about one thing. He is definitely going to pay. Let us draft the final paperwork." We opened a secure laptop right there on the bar and began constructing the most devastating financial document Ethris Health would ever receive. We were not asking for a polite severance package. We were executing a hostile financial takeover. The first line item on the invoice was meticulously calculated, based on the commercial licensing agreement they had unknowingly triggered, for the massive, unprecedented surge in data processing over the past 30 days. The usage fee came out to a perfectly neat $1 million, but we were just getting started. The second line item was the penalty strike, for the willful documented breach of my intellectual property contract, the unauthorized reverse engineering attempt, and what Marcus brilliantly categorized as a disaster-level emergency infrastructure consulting fee. We added another $1.5 million. The final total sat at the bottom of the page in bold, unforgiving black ink, $2.5 million. But an invoice is just a piece of paper without leverage. To guarantee payment, Marcus attached a brutally drafted cease and desist order. The terms were completely non-negotiable. Ethris had exactly 48 hours to wire the full $2.5 million into my private corporate account. If the money arrived, I would hand over the encrypted reactivation keys, restarting the servers and instantly sealing their bleeding data leak. If the money did not arrive within exactly 48 hours, Marcus would personally hand-deliver our massive binder of forensic evidence to the Federal Trade Commission and the Department of Health and Human Services. We would expose the massive data leak, trigger the federal investigations, and let the government burn Ethris to the ground. When the documents were finalized and printed, we did not email them to Julian Vance. Julian was a dead man walking, a low-level executive drowning in his own incompetence. We bypassed him entirely. Marcus placed the thick stack of demands into a tamper-proof legal courier envelope. He hired a private delivery service with explicit, signed instructions. The package was delivered by hand, securely and directly, to the private residential addresses of the chairman of the board of directors and the chief financial officer. We went straight to the people who held the actual checkbook, forcing them to look at the massive, catastrophic fire their arrogant chief technology officer had just started. The physical courier delivery hit the executive floor of Ethris Health like a tactical strike. Less than an hour after those thick envelopes landed on the heavy mahogany desks of the highest-ranking officers, an emergency board of directors meeting was violently convened. I was not in the room, of course, but Marcus had eyes and ears everywhere in the Chicago corporate law circuit, and the internal gossip network provided the rest of the glorious details. Julian Vance was practically dragged into the executive boardroom. The smug, untouchable aura he usually projected was completely shattered. The chief financial officer, a man whose entire existence revolved around risk mitigation, did not even offer Julian a seat. He simply picked up the brutally itemized invoice for $2.5 million and threw it directly into Julian's chest. The papers scattered across the polished floor. The chief financial officer demanded to know exactly how a company preparing for a multi-billion-dollar public offering was currently being held by the throat by a single former employee. Julian, sweating profusely right through his silk shirt, desperately tried to spin his final web of lies. He threw his hands in the air and yelled that this was a coordinated cyber attack. He screamed that I was a rogue hacker, a disgruntled criminal committing corporate extortion, and that they needed to call the federal authorities immediately to have me arrested. But the chief internal legal counsel for Ethris, who had spent the last 2 hours frantically verifying every single terrifying claim in Marcus's binder, slammed her hands on the table. She looked at Julian with absolute disgust and completely dismantled his delusion. "There is no extortion, Julian," she stated coldly, her voice echoing in the tense room. "She owns the entire foundational architecture. You fired the only person shielding this company from federal prison, and you did it without consulting legal. She is entirely within her legal rights, and because of your unauthorized hacking attempts last night, she has undeniable proof that we are currently leaking unencrypted healthcare data to the open web." Right at the peak of that chaotic screaming match, the massive flat-screen television mounted at the end of the boardroom flickered to life. The board had desperately requested a video conference to negotiate, and we obliged. The camera feed activated. On their end, the screen displayed a room full of terrified billionaires in incredibly expensive suits, their faces pale and drawn. On my end, I was sitting comfortably on my worn living room sofa. I was wearing a faded gray hooded sweatshirt, casually sipping hot black coffee from a cheap ceramic mug I bought at a thrift store. I leaned into the webcam and offered a slow, deliberate smirk. I locked eyes with Julian, who was trembling at the edge of the conference table. He looked absolutely destroyed. The chief financial officer took a deep breath, trying to salvage some shred of corporate authority. He approached the camera and attempted to play the role of the seasoned negotiator. "We acknowledge the severe miscommunications regarding the licensing agreements," he started, his voice tight. "We are prepared to authorize an immediate wire transfer to settle this dispute quietly. We will offer you a flat $1 million right now to restore our system functionality and sign a non-disclosure agreement." I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the silence stretch out and strangle them. I set the mug down and leaned closer to the microphone. "My code might be completely inelegant, as your brilliant chief technology officer so loudly proclaimed," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "But I assure you, this $2.5 million figure is extremely neat. It is not an opening offer. It is a penalty. You have exactly 3 hours before my attorney hits send on a fully prepared report to the federal government. After that, your company goes to zero." The room erupted into panicked murmurs, but the internal counsel quickly silenced them with a sharp nod. They had absolutely zero leverage. The chief financial officer turned his furious gaze back to Julian. In the ultimate act of poetic justice, the board of directors forced Julian to log into the corporate emergency reserve portal himself. They stood over his shoulder, watching as his shaking fingers typed in the authorization codes to drain his own departmental budget. I watched my secondary monitor. 5 minutes later, the notification pinged. The wire transfer had cleared. $2.5 million had officially landed in my private corporate account. I turned back to the camera. Julian was staring at the floor, his career evaporating before his eyes. Without saying another word, I opened the video meeting chat box. I typed out a single, 15-character command line string and pressed enter. "There is your restart key," I said. "Have your junior developers paste that into the terminal. Good luck with the artificial intelligence integration." I disconnected the call. The screen went black. Julian Vance was fired on the spot before he even walked out of that boardroom. He received absolutely zero severance pay. The news of his catastrophic technical ignorance and his massive legal liability spread through Silicon Valley faster than a virus. His reputation was permanently blackened. No respectable tech firm would ever let him near a server room again. As for me, I closed my laptop, walked into my kitchen, and poured another cup of coffee. With $2.5 million in liquid capital, I did not need to hunt for another corporate job. I officially launched my own boutique data security firm the very next month. I completely refused to take a single dime from venture capital investors. I built the infrastructure my way, on my terms. I was no longer the silent worker in the shadows. I was the person writing the rules, and I swore to myself that I would never, ever be just an employee again. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please let us know in the comments where you are listening from. We always love seeing our worldwide audience. If you found today's story entertaining and satisfying, Please remember that YouTube has completely demonetized this channel, meaning we can no longer afford to upload new videos here for the foreseeable future. We are transitioning entirely to Patreon. Please help us keep this project alive by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon community there. You can listen to our absolute best, longest, and most detailed exclusive true stories that we simply cannot publish on YouTube. You can easily join by scanning the QR code currently on your screen, or by clicking the Patreon link provided in the video description or the pinned comment below. Thank you again, and we will see you over there.